What if Jonah and Elise had arrived a little earlier? Or maybe if they had decided to delay their entrance by just half an hour? It's hard not to imagine how drastically different everything might have turned out. Yet here I was, watching a man like a hawk from across the room, my stomach churning with equal parts anger and purpose. Elliot, the man at the center of my attention, moved through the crowd with an unsettling grace. His demeanor was calculated, his eyes sharp and observant, scanning the room as if he were a predator selecting his prey. His body language was fluid, almost magnetic, as though he knew how to manipulate the atmosphere around him. My pulse quickened as I watched him focus on a couple seated a few tables away. The man was obliviously chatting, laughing over his drink, while the woman occasionally glanced around nervously, playing with the edge of her napkin. I already knew how this would play out if I didn't intervene. I didn't need confirmation to know what Elliot was planning. His type was easy to spot once you had the misfortune of falling victim to them. Months ago, he'd torn my life apart, reducing everything I held dear to ashes. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about closure, justice, prevention, maybe all three. Sliding through the crowd, I matched his movements, careful to stay just outside his periphery. My heart raced as the memories came flooding back, of how he'd lured my wife away from me, of the humiliation I'd felt in front of my children. The devastation that followed had been a slow poison, eroding my family and everything I had worked for. I tightened my fists, willing the memories to fuel my resolve. Tonight, Elliot wouldn't ruin another family. "Hey," I said sharply, stepping directly into his path. My voice was calm but carried an undertone that I knew he couldn't ignore. Elliot paused, his confident smirk faltering as he looked at me. For a moment, I wondered if he recognized me. But no, I was just another faceless casualty to him, a statistic in his game. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice dripping with false politeness. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't remember me, do you?" "Of course. Why would you? People like you don't bother remembering the damage you cause." His confusion turned to discomfort, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his composed facade. He didn't respond, so I pressed on. 8 months ago, a party like this. You danced with my wife, told her she deserved better than a boring husband. Does that jog your memory?" The surrounding tables began to quiet down as heads turned toward us. Elliot's eyes darted nervously around the room, his mask of confidence slipping further. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." My voice rose, and I stepped closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You knew she was married. You didn't care. You never care, do you? All you see are opportunities." The room had gone almost completely silent now, with whispers spreading like wildfire. People were craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the unfolding drama. I could feel the weight of their stares, but it only fueled my determination. Elliot tried to step back, but I matched his movement, keeping the distance between us uncomfortably close. "You're going to listen to me," I said, my voice low but firm. "For once, you're going to hear what it's like on the other side of your little games." Elliot raised his hands, palms out, as if to calm me. "Look, man, I'm sorry if something happened." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare apologize to me like it means anything. Do you even understand what you've done? Do you know what it's like to tell your kids their mom's not coming home because someone like you tore their family apart?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elliot's expression was carefully neutral now, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He wasn't used to being confronted like this, especially not in public. For a moment, I thought he might lash out or try to turn the situation around, but he stayed quiet. I glanced at my watch, calculating how much time I had left. Everything had to go according to plan. The police were already on their way, and I needed to make sure Elliot didn't slip away before they arrived. Reaching into my jacket, I pulled out the object that had been weighing on me all evening, a Glock 19. A collective gasp spread through the room, and several people scrambled to back away. Elliot froze, his eyes widening as he stared at the gun. For the first time, I saw real fear in his expression. "Sit down," I ordered, gesturing to the nearest chair. Elliot hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape. I leveled the gun at him, my hand steady. I said, "Sit down." Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair, his hands gripping the edges of the seat. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. I could hear the distant wail of sirens approaching, but they were still a few minutes away. Just enough time. I kept my gaze locked on Elliot as the room held its collective breath. Every eye was on us. Every phone was pointed in our direction. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a tense, oppressive silence. This was what I wanted. Witnesses, proof, a moment of clarity for everyone to see Elliot for what he truly was. "You thrive on humiliation, don't you?" I said, my voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You target people like me, husbands, fathers. You go after their wives, destroy their families, and then walk away like it's nothing. But not tonight." Elliot's lips pressed into a thin line, his fear barely concealed under a veneer of defiance. "Look, I don't know what you think I've done, but this isn't the way to handle it." "Oh, it's exactly the way to handle it." I shot back. "You see, Elliot, people like you rely on the shadows. You operate quietly, discreetly. But here in the open, with everyone watching, you can't hide." The sirens grew louder, but I ignored them. This moment wasn't about them. It was about me and the wreckage Elliot had left in his wake. I gestured toward the blonde woman seated nearby, her husband now standing protectively in front of her. "You see her?" I said, pointing with my free hand. "She's next on your list, isn't she? You've already decided she's vulnerable, that she'll fall for whatever lines you feed her. But not tonight." The blonde woman's husband, clearly shaken, glanced between me and Elliot, unsure of what to do. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling. Elliot's mask cracked further, panic flickering across his face. "Don't listen to him," he said quickly. "He's making this up." "Am I?" I said, my tone sharp. "Do you really think this is some elaborate lie? Ask your wife. Ask her how many times Elliot's glanced her way tonight. Ask her what he said when you went to the bar." The man turned to his wife, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. She opened her mouth to respond but faltered, her cheeks flushing with guilt. That was all the confirmation he needed. "You bastard," the husband muttered, stepping toward Elliot, his fists clenched. "Hey, hey," I interjected, holding up a hand. "Not yet. Let him squirm a little longer." Elliot shifted in his seat, his confidence eroding under the weight of the crowd's judgment. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that his usual tactics wouldn't save him this time. The sirens outside were deafening now, and moments later, the doors burst open. Uniformed officers poured into the room, their weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Hands!" I slowly raised my hands, keeping the Glock pointed downward as I stepped back from Elliot. "I'm the one you're looking for," I announced, my voice calm. "I'm unarmed now." The gun's on the table. The officers hesitated, scanning the room, before one of them approached cautiously. He picked up the gun, inspecting it before motioning for another officer to handcuff me. I didn't resist as they secured my wrists, their grip firm but not rough. Elliot, still seated, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The officers turned to him, their expressions hard. "Are you pressing charges?" one of them asked. Elliot hesitated, clearly weighing his options. If he pressed charges, the entire story would come out. The videos, the affairs, the lies he'd spun. He shook his head. "No," he muttered. "Just get him out of here." A month later, I found myself standing in a courtroom, my lawyer beside me. The prosecutor painted me as a dangerous vigilante, someone who had taken the law into their own hands. I couldn't argue with that. I had. But my lawyer fought back, arguing for leniency. He presented evidence of Elliot's pattern of behavior, the dozens of families he destroyed, the testimonies of his victims. By the end of the trial, the jury was visibly conflicted. When the verdict came down, guilty with a sentence of 5 to 8 years, I accepted it without complaint. I'd known from the start that there would be consequences for my actions, and I was prepared to face them. Prison was exactly as I'd expected. Grim, manned, and full of men who had little to lose. But word of why I was there spread quickly, and to my surprise, It earned me a strange sort of respect. Inmates who had nothing in common with me would nod in acknowledgement as I passed. Their silent approval was a small comfort in an otherwise bleak existence. I kept my head down, avoided trouble, and counted the days until my parole hearings began. Every year, Elliot would show up, leaning heavily on his cane, his hatred for me written all over his face. And every year, his testimony ensured I stayed behind bars. In my 5th year, Elliot didn't show up. No cane, no smug expression, no venomous words. I didn't know why, and I didn't ask. Without him there, the board granted my parole, and I walked out of prison a free man. Walking out of the prison gates felt surreal. The air was crisp, the sun brighter than I remembered. Freedom tasted bittersweet. I had no family waiting for me, no home to return to. My ex-wife had remarried, and my kids, now teenagers, likely remembered me more as the man who was arrested than the father who once tucked them in at night. Still, there was one thing I knew I had to do: start over. The world wasn't going to hand me a second chance, but I was determined to create one. I secured a bed at a halfway house and began the slow process of piecing my life back together. 2 days after my release, I received a call from an unknown number. The man on the other end introduced himself as Leo, a small business owner who'd heard about my story. "I run a logistics company," he said. "I'm willing to give you a job, no questions asked. You'll need training, but if you're serious about rebuilding, I can help." Skeptical but desperate, I agreed. A meeting was arranged at a local diner where Leo and his business partner, Alan, waited for me. They were older men, each with the weary look of people who had seen their share of hardship. But their smiles were warm, and their offer genuine. Over coffee, Leo explained why he had reached out. "You did what a lot of us only dreamed of doing," he said. "Alan and I, we've been in your shoes. Elliot destroyed our families too." My breath caught. "You knew him?" Alan nodded grimly. "Our wives fell into his trap years ago. We lost everything. Our marriages, our peace of mind. When we saw your story on the news, we couldn't look away. You had the courage to do what we couldn't." Their words hit me like a freight train. I thought my pain was singular, that my story was unique. But here were 2 men who understood exactly what I had been through. Leo and Alan didn't just offer me a job, they offered me a lifeline. They trained me in logistics, teaching me everything from inventory management to truck maintenance. The work was grueling, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose. In time, I found a small apartment through one of Alan's contacts. It wasn't much, just a single room with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, but it was mine. For the first time since my arrest, I felt a flicker of hope. Months into my new job, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature at the bottom sent a chill down my spine. Elliot. The contents were cryptic, an invitation to meet at a local park. Against my better judgment, I went. When I arrived, I found him seated on a bench, his cane resting beside him. He looked older, more weathered, but his eyes still held that infuriating spark of arrogance. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my distance. "I wanted to see you," he replied, his voice calm, "to understand why you did it." This question stunned me. "You don't get it, do you? You ruin lives. Mine, Leo's, Alan's, dozens of others, and you think this is about understanding?" He leaned back, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "People like me don't change, you know? But people like you, you're fascinating. You think you're the hero of this story, but you're just as broken as the rest of us." Elliot's words echoed in my mind long after I left the park. I hated that he had a point, hated that his presence could still unnerve me. But his smugness had lit a fire in me, a determination to prove him wrong, to build a life that couldn't be touched by the likes of him. Weeks later, I learned through Leo that Elliot had taken his own life. The news was shocking, but I couldn't muster sadness. His death felt like the final chapter of a long and painful book. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. With Elliot gone, I found myself thinking more about my kids. I hadn't seen them in years, but Leo encouraged me to reach out. "They deserve to know you tried," he said. Writing the letter was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I poured my heart into it, explaining everything. my mistakes, my regrets, my hope for a second chance. Weeks passed without a response, but then one day, a letter arrived. It was from my son, Nathan. He was cautious, unsure if he wanted to meet, but his words held a glimmer of curiosity. I wrote back immediately, starting a correspondence that became the highlight of my days. Over time, Nathan opened up, and eventually, he agreed to meet. Seeing Nathan in person was overwhelming. He had grown so much, taller, more confident, but his eyes held the same warmth I remembered. We talked for hours, catching up on years we had lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Nathan and I continued meeting in the months that followed, slowly rebuilding a relationship I feared was lost forever. At first, our conversations were hesitant, guarded. He asked questions about my time in prison, about what led to that fateful night with Elliot. I answered honestly, even when it hurt, determined not to sugarcoat the truth. "I hated you for a long time," he admitted one evening as we sat on a park bench. "I didn't understand why you'd throw everything away. But now I get it. You were protecting us." His words left me speechless. I had never thought of my actions as anything other than a reaction to my own pain, but hearing Nathan's perspective gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I had done something right. Nathan eventually brought his twin sister, Natalie, into our meetings. Unlike her brother, she was more skeptical, her anger simmering just below the surface. "Why now?" she asked during our first meeting, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Why did it take you so long to reach out?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't shy away. "Because I was scared," I admitted. "Scared that you wouldn't want me in your life. Scared that I'd already done too much damage. But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." It wasn't an instant fix, but over time, Natalie began to soften. She saw the effort I was making, the sincerity in my words. And while our relationship was far from perfect, it was a start. One night, I found myself thinking about my ex-wife, Emily. I had avoided contacting her, respecting the boundaries she had set years ago. But my conversations with Nathan and Natalie had stirred memories I couldn't ignore. I wondered if she was happy, if she ever thought about the life we had built before everything fell apart. Leo, ever the pragmatist, offered his perspective over a late-night drink. "You've made peace with Elliot," he said. "Maybe it's time to make peace with her too." It wasn't a simple decision, but after weeks of deliberation, I decided to write her a letter. I didn't ask for anything. No meetings, no reconciliation. Just an acknowledgement of the mistakes we had both made and a wish for her happiness. To my surprise, Emily responded. Her letter was cautious but kind, filled with updates about her life and our children. She wrote about her new husband, who she described as patient and supportive, and about the challenges of co-parenting after our divorce. "I won't pretend that what happened didn't hurt," she wrote, "but I've seen the changes in Nathan and Natalie since they started talking to you. They're happier, more grounded. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Her words were a balm I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time, I felt a sense of closure with Emily, a sense that, while we could never go back to what we were, we had both found a way forward. With my relationship slowly mending, I began to think about the future. My work with Leo and Alan had given me stability, but I wanted something more. Inspired by the stories I had heard from other victims of people like Elliot, I decided to start a support group. It was a modest idea at first, just a handful of men and women gathering to share their experiences, but it quickly grew into something much larger. Within months, the group had expanded, drawing people from all walks of life who had been impacted by betrayal and loss. We offered resources, counseling, and, most importantly, a sense of community. For the first time in years, I felt like I was making a real difference. The group's success didn't go unnoticed. Local media picked up on the story, and soon I was being invited to speak at events and conferences. It was surreal, standing in front of crowds and sharing my journey, but it was also incredibly fulfilling. I wasn't just helping others, I was helping myself too. Through the group, I met people who had experienced pain far greater than mine. Their resilience inspired me, pushing me to keep going even when I felt overwhelmed. Each story reminded me that, while I couldn't change the past, I could still create something meaningful in the present. Nathan and Natalie began attending some of the group's events, their presence a quiet show of support. Seeing them there, surrounded by people who understood or shared pain, filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. One evening, after an especially moving session, Natalie approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said softly. "I don't think I ever said that before, but I am." Her words were a gift I hadn't expected, and they stayed with me long after the event ended. As the years passed, my life began to take on a sense of normalcy. The support group continued to grow, and my work with Leo and Alan flourished. I even started dating again, cautiously opening myself up to the possibility of love. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Nathan and Natalie became fixtures in my life, their visits a source of constant joy. We weren't the family we had once been, but we were something new, something stronger. Looking back, I often thought about Elliot, not with anger, but with a strange sense of gratitude. His actions had nearly destroyed me, but they had also forced me to confront the darkest parts of myself. In doing so, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. The support group became my legacy, a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of community. Through it, I had turned my pain into something meaningful, something that could help others navigate their own struggles. On the 10th anniversary of my release from prison, I stood before a packed room at a conference, sharing my story for what felt like the 100th time. As I spoke, I saw Nathan and Natalie sitting in the front row, their faces filled with pride. Emily was there too, her smile a quiet reminder of how far we had all come. When I finished, the crowd rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the room. I stepped back, letting the moment wash over me, and for the first time in years, I felt truly whole. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with countless challenges, but it had led me here, to a life rebuilt, relationships mended, and a purpose that gave every day meaning. And in that moment, I knew I had finally found peace.